Oak Creek Memorial in Denver smells like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Laura Bennett has been smelling it for 7 years, and it still hasn't become home. She moves through the emergency department at 2:14 p.m. on a Thursday with the kind of efficiency that makes her invisible. Scrubs in pale blue. Name badge reading only L. Bennett RN. A slight limp in her left leg when she thinks no one is watching, a souvenir from Ramadi that never quite healed the way the doctors promised. Her hands are steady as a surgical laser as she charts vitals on tablet 3, then 4, then 5. A junior resident passes without looking at her. This is the way she prefers it. Invisibility is a skill set, like trauma stabilization or recognizing the sound of incoming rounds. She learned both in the same place. The ER door's pneumatic hiss announces incoming. Laura's head doesn't turn. She's learned not to look anymore. But her body already knows, the shift in air pressure, the urgency in the paramedic's voice calling out vitals, the particular scrape of a gurney hitting the double doors at exactly the wrong angle. Muscle memory doesn't need permission to activate. Male, 34, GSW to left thorax, surgical emphysema on arrival, O2 sat 86 on high-flow non-rebreather, the paramedic is saying, voice clipped like he's reading off a mental checklist at the speed of someone who has recited this 17 times today. Security detail. Presidential. Direct admission to Trauma Bay 1, no waiting. They're calling ahead, top-level insurance, everything goes through the chain. Laura looks up from her tablet. Not at the gurney. She doesn't need to. She's already catalogued the patient from sound alone, respiratory distress, penetrating trauma, government priority. She's processed 100 like him. 1,000. In different buildings, under different skies, with different survival rates depending on whether the blood bank had O negative at 2 a.m. or if the surgeons were already scrubbed in somewhere else. She sets the tablet down. Moves. The resident who wasn't looking at her 30 seconds ago calls out, Bennett, I need your blood type. Stat. Most nurses would ask why. Laura doesn't. She's already walking to the phlebotomy station, rolling up her left sleeve as she moves. The scarring along her forearm catches briefly in the fluorescent light, old marks, faded to white, the kind that make people stare for exactly 1 second before deciding not to ask. She doesn't give them time to ask anymore. O negative with the Duffy antigen marker, she says before they can ask. You'll need a full cross-match. Jesus, the lab tech actually stops. That's rare. How rare? Rare enough that I've never seen another person with it in this hospital, the senior resident says, looking up from the trauma bay. His name is Hendricks. He's competent but cautious, the kind of doctor who reads protocols twice before deviating. Bennett, can you donate? Yes. Like, do you need to check your schedule, or? I said yes. She's already sitting in the donation chair before anyone can offer it. The phlebotomist, a woman named Carol who has been trying to get Laura to join a book club for 3 years, preps her arm with the efficiency of someone who knows better than to ask questions when a nurse offers blood. The tourniquet goes on, tight as a command. The needle slides in smooth as a prayer, and Laura watches her own blood flow into the bag with the detached curiosity of someone watching a necessary mechanism operate exactly as designed. 1 unit or 2? Carol asks. 2. That's a lot, even for you. He needs 2, Laura says. Her voice is even. Flat. The voice she uses when she's calculated probabilities and found them grim. Do 2. The bag fills. Ruby red becoming darker, almost black against the fluorescent overhead. Somewhere in Trauma Bay 1, the medic is cooling rapidly. Laura knows this without turning around. She can hear it in the pitch of the surgical team's voices, in the speed of their movements, in the way Hendricks hasn't called for cardiology yet, because a thoracic surgeon is already walking in. She can hear his footsteps, and that means the decision tree has shifted to something more urgent than time allows. Penetrating thoracic trauma with surgical emphysema and oxygen saturation dropping from 86 means one of 3 things: pneumothorax, hemothorax, or cardiac tamponade. The pericardium fills with blood instead of the heart's own rhythm, and the heart stops pumping because it physically cannot expand. She's seen it happen exactly 4 times. 3 of those patients never made it off the table. The needle comes out. Carol presses gauze and tape in quick succession. Laura stands before the dizziness can settle and carries the 2 units back to the trauma bay herself rather than trusting them to a runner. The medic on the table is young. Early 30s, athletic frame, the kind of fit that comes from deliberate maintenance rather than accident of genetics. His chest is already open under surgical lights, and the attending is moving through a resuscitative thoracotomy with the precision of someone who's performed the procedure exactly enough times to know it by body memory. Laura sets the blood on the warmer without a word. Hendricks glances at her, a question in his eyes that is too professional to speak aloud. She doesn't answer. She moves to the vital signs monitor instead, watching the numbers climb like she's reading a manual written in a language only her hands understand. The warming blood enters the fall line, 1,800 milliliters of her body, her type, her matching markers. The heart rate on the monitor stutters, then settles. The attending murmurs something to the surgical nurse about the aorta looking intact, and Laura feels the smallest shift in the room's air pressure. The one that means the probability tree just branched toward survival instead of away from it. She steps back. That's when she notices the jacket draped on a chair near the monitors, standard security detail gear, dark wool, the kind that costs more than her monthly rent. Her eyes catch on something sewn into the interior lining where someone careless has left it open. A unit patch. Faded blue. Specific colors that mean exactly one thing, used to mean exactly one thing to her, back when she was someone who belonged to a unit instead of someone who belongs to paperwork and phantom records. Laura's hands stop moving. For exactly 1 second. That's all she allows herself. Then she's moving again, checking the foredrip, confirming the warming protocols, positioning her body between the chair and anyone else who might look. The patch stays hidden. The jacket stays exactly where it is. And Laura Bennett, Senior Chief Petty Officer, who spent 23 years in classified operations that the government ordered erased from every official record, donates her blood to a trauma patient she doesn't know and a war she's supposed to have never fought in. In his office on the 4th floor, Dr. Sterling receives an automated alert on his secure hospital email at 2:19 p.m. The system flags any patient admitted through executive protection channels. Standard protocol. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. Except the donor blood inventory has been cross-matched to a name that triggers a secondary alert, one that shouldn't trigger, one that he's never seen trigger in all the years he's been billing phantom cardiology procedures through government insurance at rates that would make a luxury car dealer blush. He reads the name twice. L. Bennett, RN. Blood type O negative with Duffy antigen marker. Standard donation consent form. Standard hospital procedure. Except that name is also flagged in a database he doesn't have access to anymore. A database that was supposed to stay sealed. A database that contains medical records for people who don't officially exist. The kinds of people who spent their professional lives in places where the government paid the hospital bills through insurance codes that barely concealed their origin, until those people either retired quietly with pensions that got paid into accounts in their maiden names or didn't. The alert sits in his inbox like an unexploded device. Dr. Sterling is not a stupid man. He is, in fact, quite intelligent enough to know that he has been billing the federal government for procedures that never happened on behalf of phantom patients who were never actually admitted, clever enough to retake the code so the pattern would be invisible to automated auditing systems. Strategic enough to have built relationships with 3 board members who have their own reasons not to notice discrepancies in his departmental oversight. But intelligence and stupidity exist on the same spectrum with context. And the context is this: the person whose rare blood is right now flowing into a trauma patient from the president's security detail is someone whose presence in the hospital system was supposed to be impossible. Someone whose fingerprint shouldn't even exist in civilian databases anymore. Someone who, if she had any reason to look closely at billing records, would have the exact skill set required to notice the kind of discrepancies that Sterling has been so carefully constructing. He stares at the alert. The name. The blood type. The patient admission flagged as presidential security detail. His hand moves to his desk phone. Then he stops. Not yet. First, he needs to understand what she's doing here. Understand the threat. Understand whether she's a threat at all or just a ghost who took a nursing job in Denver and happened to donate blood at exactly the wrong moment. He closes the email instead of responding to it. Opens his calendar. Finds the night shift schedule. Marks her name for observation. The heart monitor in Trauma Bay 1 shows sinus rhythm now, steady as a metronome, and the attending nods once at the surgical team. The patient is stable enough for transport to the ICU. Stable enough, meaning Laura's blood has bought him time. Stable enough, meaning he'll probably live to wake up on machines and remember none of this except the moment before the world went dark. She steps away from the bed as they begin the transfer protocols. Carol finds her near the blood bank station. That's 3 times this year, Carol says, holding up her own paperwork. 3 times you've donated 2 units. Your numbers are coming back strong, but Laura, you know you're supposed to wait 8 weeks between donations. I waited 8 weeks. Barely. You're going to donate yourself into anemia. Laura turns to face her. Her voice, when she speaks, is precisely level. The voice of someone speaking through a protocol she learned long before she learned nursing. If he needs blood, I donate. That's how it works. But you don't even. Carol stops herself. Catches the look. The one that says asking the next question would be a mistake. Never mind. You're cleared for basic duties only for the next 2 hours. No lifting, no heavy interventions. Strict light duty. Understood. Laura, I mean it. You go light. I understand the protocol, Carol. But she's already moving toward the ICU, where the medic from the presidential security detail is being admitted to Bay 17, where he'll spend the next 48 hours either stabilizing or declining, where she will not be assigned but will nonetheless appear regularly to check the lines, verify the medications, ensure the transfer protocols are being followed with the kind of precision that suggests she's not just a nurse but someone who's handled this particular patient type before. Many times. In conditions Carol couldn't imagine, under skies that Carol has never flown beneath. The thing about donating blood, Laura thinks as she moves through the corridor toward the ICU, is that it creates a biological connection. A marker. A signature that says, you shared something essential, you gave something irreplaceable, you belong to this place, this patient, this moment in a way that transcends the paperwork. She doesn't realize yet that her signature has already been recorded. That fingerprints don't fade from federal databases, and certain kinds of alerts don't expire because the government never forgets the names of people it ordered to disappear. She doesn't realize that something she did at 2:14 p.m. on a Thursday has already started a countdown clock that won't be stopped by protocols or paperwork or even the 7 years of invisibility she's so carefully constructed. The medic in Bay 17 is beginning to wake. The blood is working. Her blood is working. And somewhere on the 4th floor, Dr. Sterling is making a list of people he needs to call. Of favors he needs to extract. Of ways to ensure that Senior Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett, who technically doesn't exist, will have no choice but to stay exactly that way. 3 days later, the discharge papers are signed. The elderly man, Robert Fitzgerald, 72, post-op day 4, sits in a wheelchair while his daughter holds his hand and his son-in-law grips Laura's shoulder with genuine gratitude. Laura stands at the bedside explaining the medication schedule, the warning signs of infection, the phone number to call if his incision starts pulling or if he develops a fever above 100.5. Her voice is steady. Professional. She has done this 843 times. She remembers every number because precision keeps people alive. You've been so kind to Dad, the daughter says. The other nurses just handed us papers, but you actually explained everything. Laura nods. Says nothing. The compliment feels dangerous. The door opens without a knock. Dr. Sterling enters with the confidence of someone who has never questioned his right to occupy any space he chooses. He is tall in the way expensive tailoring makes men seem taller: charcoal wool, monogrammed cufflinks, a Cartier watch that costs more than Laura's truck. His hair is silver and deliberately maintained. He looks at the family, then at Laura, then back at the family with an expression of practiced concern. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I'm Dr. Sterling, the medical director. I wanted to personally oversee your discharge." He steps between Laura and the daughter with the precision of someone practiced at it. "Your care was exemplary. You're in excellent hands now." The implication lands clean as a scalpel. Laura takes one measured breath. Sterling turns to her. "Nurse Bennett, you don't have authorization to provide medical consultation. That's a physician's role." His voice carries the bright clarity of a lecture hall. Everyone in the hallway hears it. "Perhaps you've forgotten your place in the care hierarchy. These detailed explanations, that's my responsibility, not yours." The daughter's face goes uncertain. The son-in-law's hand releases Laura's shoulder. "I was reviewing discharge instructions," Laura says. Her voice is level. "Like still water. Standard nursing protocol." "Standard nursing protocol," Sterling repeats, as if she said something quaint. "Yes. And standard protocol means the physician provides medical guidance, not the nursing staff." He turns back to the family with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "She's well-meaning, but sometimes we need to reinforce these boundaries. You understand, everyone has their role." Robert Fitzgerald looks at Laura, then back at Sterling. The shame in his face is a small death. Sterling places a hand on the wheelchair. "I'll personally walk you out and make sure you have everything you need. Bennett, you can return to your other assignments." It isn't a request. It never is. Laura steps back. The family leaves with Sterling escorting them, narrating the hallway like a tour guide, his voice fading toward the elevators. The room empties. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. Laura stands alone in the space where she just lost something she didn't know she was holding. That afternoon, she enters the break room on the 4th floor. The room smells like microwaved fish and burned coffee and the particular staleness of a space where people eat in silence. She unwraps her sandwich, turkey and Swiss, 6-grain bread, nothing fancy, and sits at the corner table with her cracked mug that says "the world's okayest nurse" in fading blue letters. The mug is from a Secret Santa 3 years ago. She has never found out who gave it to her. Within 30 seconds, 3 nurses find sudden reasons to leave. Marcus, who trained alongside her for 2 years, stands abruptly. "I forgot my keys," he says to no one. Janet gathers her Tupperware without making eye contact. A third nurse, Jessica, who asked Laura for advice on a difficult patient just yesterday, whispers something to a colleague near the sink, and they both relocate to the hallway. The room empties like a contamination zone. Laura eats her sandwich. Chews carefully. Takes sips of water from the mug. The break room is silent except for the fluorescent hum and the distant beep of a monitor somewhere in the hospital. She has sat in worse silences. Sat in sandstorms. Sat in operating theaters where one wrong breath could kill someone. Sat in darkness with explosions happening in the distance and known that moving meant dying. This silence is nothing. But it is different because it is hers, and the hospital is supposed to be hers, and now she is being erased by people who have never closed a wound under pressure, who have never had to stop bleeding with nothing but what was in her pockets, who have never held someone's hand as their eyes went still. She finishes eating. Washes her mug. Returns to work. The next morning, the fabricated disciplinary notice appears on the unit board in the main hallway, the same board where staffing schedules are posted, where continuing education credits are announced, where everyone checks their mailboxes. It is printed on official hospital letterhead. The text is a model of bureaucratic precision. Formal reprimand. Employee, L. Bennett, RN. Date, current date. Cited violations, insubordination. Documentation errors. Failure to follow chain of command. Action, written reprimand documented in personnel file. Every staff member walking past can read it. A resident stops. The pharmacy tech lingers. 2 nurses from the night shift pause and stare. Laura watches from the far end of the hallway. She doesn't look at the notice. She looks at Sterling's name at the bottom, his signature looping and confident, the signature of someone who has never doubted his own rightness. She commits the words to memory anyway. She has always been good at remembering. Names. Dates. Faces. The exact caliber of weapon. The distance to target. The number of people alive because she chose not to panic when everything was breaking. A junior doctor named Chen approaches the board around 8 in the morning. He is 6 weeks out of medical school, still wearing his whiteboard like it's a crown. He smirks at Laura, who is restocking the 4-cart 2 feet away. He makes a show of reading the notice, then turns to her with the expression of someone who has just figured out a math problem. "Did you even finish nursing school?" he asks. His tone suggests he already knows the answer. "Or did you test out online?" The hospital goes quiet in a way that has nothing to do with sound. 2 nurses stop talking. A resident pauses mid-stride. The air pressure changes. Laura straightens. She meets Chen's eyes and lets one tear escape, not from fear, not from anger, but from the exhaustion of sitting in a room that is emptying, of having her name printed on an official letter, of watching a child she once saved be walked out of a room by a man who has no idea who he's standing next to. She wipes the tear away without breaking eye contact. "I've closed chest wounds in the dark with a penlight," she says. Her voice is like still water. "I think I can manage your charting standards." Chen rolls his eyes, mutters something about attitude problems and walks away. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is Sterling in his office window, 4th floor, looking down at the hallway. He watches Chen leave. He watches Laura return to the 4-cart. He watches the way colleagues now reference her by nickname when she's not in earshot, nurse overreach, they call her. Scope creep. The label attaches itself to her the way blood attaches to tile, visible, permanent, resistant to cleaning. Sterling has begun making phone calls to the references on Laura's original nursing application. He speaks in a tone of professional concern. "I'm just trying to understand some inconsistencies in her background," he tells a director from her previous hospital in San Diego. "Some colleagues have mentioned concerns about substance abuse. Has that ever been flagged?" He listens. He thanks them. He documents the conversation in a file labeled Bennett, Credibility Assessment. 3 hospitals, 3 phone calls, 3 careful implications of addiction that never happened, substance abuse that never existed, professional failures that he is synthesizing from the gaps in her public record. He is methodical about it. He is strategic. He is building a case that will prevent her from working anywhere in the state if it comes down to it, will ensure that whatever she tries to do next, his word, a hospital's director's word, a man with credentials and institutional power, will precede her like a shadow. He doesn't know that she has survived worse than institutional failure. Doesn't know that the gaps in her record exist because a government agency decided that her real job, her real rank, her real service would be erased entirely rather than acknowledged. He is playing chess against someone who has played survival. But Laura doesn't know he's making these calls yet. She doesn't know about the file on his desk labeled with her name. All she knows is that the break room clears when she enters it. All she knows is that her own reputation is being dismantled in real time, one whispered conversation at a time, one carefully worded phone call at a time, and she cannot defend herself against accusations of who she really is because that person is supposed to be dead. That evening, around 11 o'clock, while Sterling is still in his office, door open, lights on, making one more call to a reference he wants to compromise, a man arrives at Oak Creek Memorial by ambulance from a different hospital's emergency room transfer. He is 26 years old. His name is James Rourke. His vital signs are being monitored on a portable cardiac monitor, but the readings are off. The pressures are narrowing. The heart sounds are muffled like someone is listening to his chest cavity through cotton. He is in the president's protective detail. The paperwork came with him, confidential security clearance, encrypted contact numbers, hospital protocols marked in red ink. The ER resident knows this. The attending knows this. Sterling knows this because he gets a page marked priority patient with instructions to monitor personally. And Laura knows, because she reviews the admission papers on the night shift, and she sees a name she hasn't seen in 20 years, a face that belongs to a child covered in dust, screaming for his mother in a language that was not his own, being pulled from a collapsed building in Ramadi by hands that were smaller then but no less determined. She recognizes him by the shape of his eyes. She doesn't tell anyone. Not yet. She simply watches his monitor. She documents what she sees. She notes the narrowing pulse pressure, the muffled S1 and S2, the shallow breathing that suggests his heart is drowning in fluid around it. She brings the concern to the charge nurse at 1 in the morning. His cardiac trends are deteriorating, Laura says. Pulses paradoxus on the manual cuff. I think he's developing tamponade. The charge nurse glances at the monitor. Glances at the name. Speaks in a voice that has already been poisoned. Dr. Sterling says you need to stay in your lane, Bennett. This is a physician's patient. Not yours. Laura documents her observations anyway. Writes the times. Writes the numbers. Writes the clinical findings that point to a diagnosis that will be fatal if it waits for a surgeon who is 40 minutes away. At 2:04 in the morning, James Rourke clutches his chest. His monitor screams. His oxygen saturation is dropping. His blood pressure is collapsing into the range where the body begins to shut down non-essential systems in preparation for death. Laura hits the code button. The night shift at Oak Creek Memorial moves like a held breath. Fluorescent lights hum their endless drone above the nurse's station where Laura Bennett sits reviewing charts at 2:08 a.m., her name tag visible but her presence invisible. That's how she's learned to survive the past 72 hours, present in body, absent in notice. The break room clears like a contamination zone when she walks in. The cafeteria line parts around her like she's carrying something contagious. Even now, 3 nurses cluster near the medication dispensary, their voices dropping as she passes. She hears the whisper, "Nurse overreach." It lands like a punch she doesn't acknowledge. Laura has absorbed worse. She's absorbed mortar fire, RPG shrapnel, the weight of a bleeding child in her arms in the dark. A nickname whispered in a hospital corridor is atmospheric noise compared to the sound of a building collapsing in Ramadi, to the screams that followed, to the 6-year-old boy pulled from the rubble with one arm bent backward and both eyes squeezed shut against the dust. But that was another life. That version of her doesn't exist anymore. Officially. She turns a page in James Rourke's chart. The notation is routine, vital stable, pain managed, cardiac monitor clean. But something in the sequence of entries catches her eye. The echocardiogram ordered 48 hours ago. The cardiothoracic surgeon's delayed follow-up. The subtle elevation in central venous pressure that the day shift resident documented but apparently didn't fully interpret. Laura's hands move through the chart methodically, scanning the imaging report, cross-referencing the physical exam findings, and what she sees makes her stomach tighten in a way she hasn't felt since Kandahar. Pericardial effusion. Fluid accumulating around the heart. Small initially, probably from the blunt force trauma when Rourke's Humvee went over an IED near the president's motorcade. The kind of injury that looks superficial on first assessment. The kind of injury that kills you 3 days later when the fluid volume reaches the critical threshold and the heart can no longer fill with blood between beats. Cardiac tamponade. A silent suffocation from the inside. The surgeon was supposed to drain it. Sterling's notes from this afternoon indicate the procedure was bumped to tomorrow due to an emergency in the operating room. Tomorrow. As if tomorrow exists for a heart filling with its own fluid. As if tomorrow is a guarantee when the pericardium becomes a prison. Laura closes her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. She's done this calculation before, in a forward operating base outside Fallujah where a Marine's tension pneumothorax needed decompression and the flight surgeon was 60 seconds away and not close enough. In a convoy ambush outside Sanjin where a ranger was bleeding into his abdominal cavity and the medevac helicopter was 8 minutes out and moving too slow. In a collapsed building in Ramadi where a child's breathing had stopped and his mother was already dead beneath the concrete and Laura's hands performed an emergency needle airway with a flashlight clamped between her teeth because that was all she had and that was enough. She opens her eyes and looks at the name on the chart again, James Rourke, age 28, SEAL Team 3, Charlie Platoon. Combat medic. Brought in critical, saved by her blood, now deteriorating in a hospital where the attending surgeon is delayed and the residents are still learning how to read the subtle warning signs that separate patients who die in their beds from patients who survive to go home. But there's something else in the chart that makes her hand freeze on the page. A note in the nursing assessment from the first night, patient expressed gratitude to O-negative donor. States he remembers being 6 years old in Ramadi. Recalls female voice during rescue from collapsed structure. Recalls being lifted into darkness with arm immobilized. Does not know donor identity. The room tilts. Or maybe it doesn't, and the tilt is only in her, a vertigo that comes from 20 years collapsing into a single moment. She can see him, she remembers him with absolute clarity, every detail preserved in the part of her brain that doesn't forget operational details. The boy's face caked in dust the color of old bone. The weight of him in her arms, impossibly light and impossibly heavy at the same time. The squeeze of his hand around her thumb as she carried him through the darkness toward the medics waiting at the collapse perimeter. She remembered whispering to him in Arabic she'd learned from a linguistic specialist in her unit, "You're safe now. You're safe." She never knew if he survived the journey to the field hospital. She never knew if the medics were able to save him. Her unit was extracted that night, and Ramadi became a ghost in classified files, and the boy became a memory she allowed to fade because holding onto it too clearly would have broken something in her that couldn't be repaired. She looks at the monitor beside his bed now, heart rate elevated, blood pressure beginning its slow descent, the rhythm still sinus but the trajectory unmistakable. The fluid is compressing the chambers. The clock is running in a direction that doesn't forgive delays. A presence materializes beside her. Dr. Sterling. She hears the shift in air pressure before she sees him, the kind of approach that announces authority without speaking. He leans against the counter with his arms crossed, his posture a study in controlled casualness that doesn't quite mask the tension underneath. His eyes are on James Rourke's monitor, and his expression is something that might be concern if you didn't know to look deeper, if you didn't understand that what he's actually doing is watching her. "How is our medic tonight?" Sterling's voice is conversational. Reasonable. The voice of a man ensuring proper medical protocol is being followed, nothing more. Laura doesn't look up from the chart. Stable. Vitals unchanged from the last hour. The sentence is technically true. It's also a lie of omission, and she knows Sterling hears it. She knows his network has already reported that she called up the imaging, that she pulled the surgical notes, that she's doing exactly what she'll do in the next 30 minutes. He's here to witness it. He's here to document it. He's here to ensure he has grounds for whatever comes next. The surgeon will be available tomorrow morning. Standard protocol for post-trauma observation. Sterling's emphasis on standard is surgical, a reminder that protocols exist, that boundary violations result in consequences, that is watching her with the intensity of a predator who's learned to recognize when prey intends to move. I trust you'll continue to monitor vitals and report any significant changes through the appropriate chain of command. It's not a request. It's a warning wrapped in professional language, and they both know it. Laura finally meets his eyes. Her face is still water, still as Ramadi dawn before the first mortar round, still as the moment before she pulled a child from rubble, still as every moment she's learned to be quiet and deadly in the same breath. "Of course, Doctor." 6 words. Deferential. Acceptable. Nothing in her tone suggests what she's already committed to doing. Sterling holds the eye contact for exactly 4 seconds. Then he nods, satisfied that his established dominance, that he's made clear the boundaries of her authority, that she understands the consequences of crossing them. He walks back to the physician's station with the confidence of a man who's moved pieces on a board and watched them obey his instructions. But that's because he doesn't know who he's actually moved. The monitors begin their alarm at 3:14 a.m. Laura hears it before anyone else because she's been listening to them the way a musician listens to a discordant note in an orchestra, with complete attention and absolute clarity about what comes next. Heart rate climbs to 118. Then 127. Blood pressure drops, 95/61. Then 87/52. The resident on duty, a third-year named Patterson who's been in medicine long enough to understand danger but not long enough to manage it without panic, looks up from his tablet and goes very still. "Pressure's tanking," Patterson says. It's not quite a question. It's a plea for someone to tell him this isn't happening. The monitors continue their climb and fall, the climb of the rate, the fall of the pressure. Classic tamponade. The pericardium has reached its limit. The heart is suffocating. Laura moves toward Rourke's room with a kind of economy that comes from having made these movements 1,000 times before. She doesn't run. Running suggests panic. She walks with purpose, and purpose moves faster than panic ever can. She's already pulling on fresh gloves when she reaches his bedside. Rourke's eyes are open but distant, his breathing shallow, the skin at his temples beading with sweat as his body recognizes the approaching void. She takes his hand for exactly 1 second, enough to make contact, not enough to suggest hesitation, and whispers in the same language she used 20 years ago, "You're safe now." He recognizes it. His eyes focus on her face, and something shifts in them, not recognition exactly, but the acknowledgement of something familiar in a moment of terror. Sterling's voice cuts through the doorway like a blade. "Nurse Bennett, step back from the patient." Laura doesn't turn around. She continues preparing the kit, the needle, the syringe, the chlorhexidine swab. Her hands are moving on their own, muscle memory made manifest, the way hands move when the brain has already made the decision and the body simply executes what needs execution. That's not authorized. Sterling's voice has lost its professional veneer. There's an edge now, the sound of command being challenged and not tolerating it. "You are not an attending physician. You will not perform that procedure. That is a direct order." Laura pauses. Her hand hovers over the kit. The monitors are screaming their electronic alarm. Rourke's pressure has dropped to 71/41, and at that number the body begins its shutdown sequence, the sequence that leads to irreversible organ failure, to death that would look natural and professional and nobody's fault because the surgeon was delayed and the protocol was followed and the nurse was just doing paperwork when the patient deteriorated. The residents are looking between Sterling and Rourke. Between the authority and the dying. Between the rules and survival. Laura takes a breath that lasts exactly 2 seconds. Then she opens the sterile field and begins. "You are finished here," Sterling says, and there's something almost surprised in his tone, as if he can't quite believe someone would disobey him so completely. "Security. I want security at this door now." Laura's hands don't hesitate. They move like they've rehearsed this 1,000 times because her hands have rehearsed this, in a forward operating base, under gunfire, with only a penlight and a prayer and a medic's understanding that sometimes saving a life means violating a protocol that was written for situations exactly different from this one. She preps the site below the xiphoid process with antiseptic that smells like copper and institutional care. She advances the needle at a 45-degree angle toward the left shoulder, feeling for the subtle give of tissue, the moment when the needle penetrates the fibrous sac that's been strangling his heart. The needle finds the fluid with a hiss of aspiration that sounds like air escaping from a pressure chamber. Blood. Dark and thick and pooling in the syringe as she pulls back on the plunger. 20 cubic centimeters, 40 cubic centimeters, 60 cubic centimeters. The monitors begin their descent, not the panic of alarms but the relief of pressures normalizing, of a heart that can finally fill again, of the body recognizing it's been given one more chance. 120 cubic centimeters, Laura says quietly, finishing the aspiration and stabilizing the catheter. She's not speaking to Sterling. She's not speaking to the residents. She's speaking to the moment, to the procedure, to the muscle memory that just saved a life that the protocol would have allowed to die. Rourke's eyes flutter open. His breathing deepens. The monitors settle into a rhythm that resembles something approaching normal. The residents stare in the kind of silence that comes from witnessing a violation of authority so complete that the usual rules of consequence seem to pause. Sterling's face has gone rigid with rage, the kind of rage that comes from being overridden publicly, from watching his authority trampled by someone he'd already dismissed, from understanding in this single moment that he has fundamentally miscalculated who he was threatening. He pulls out his phone before Laura has even removed her gloves. He walks to the hallway with movements that suggest barely contained fury, and she hears him making calls with the kind of precision that suggests he's been preparing for this moment. Yes, I need you to call the board members we discussed, activate the audit immediately. I need an investigator in her files tonight, understand? Look for anything, substance issues during training, gaps in employment, anything that suggests she was practicing above her license. His voice drops lower. I don't care if you have to go back 15 years. I want ammunition. This ends tonight. Within 40 minutes, security arrives with paperwork that barely qualifies as a termination letter. They hand it to her with the discomfort of people who understand they're part of something that doesn't quite feel right, but they're following orders and that's enough to make them complicit. Sterling's voice follows her down the hallway as they escort her toward the exit, each footstep echoing in the sterile corridor like the countdown to something irreversible. You were warned about practicing beyond your scope, Nurse Bennett. This hospital has standards. Those standards don't include insubordination and gross negligence. She wants to turn around. She wants to tell him that she's closed chest wounds in absolute darkness with only a penlight, that she's led trauma teams in conditions that would make his sterile operating room seem like a luxury resort, that the child, now a man, she just saved from cardiac tamponade was the same 6-year-old boy she pulled from a collapsed building when she was young enough to still believe in rules. She wants to tell him that her hands have saved more lives than he's ever had the privilege to treat, that her training came from the kind of textbooks written in blood and consequence rather than published by medical boards. But she can't. Because officially, Senior Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett doesn't exist. Her unit's operations in Ramadi were redacted from history. The lives she saved in Kandahar and Fallujah and Sanjin are classified. The medals are in a box that no longer has an owner. She was ordered to vanish, and she spent 20 years perfecting the art of disappearing. The nurse in Scrubs is just another version of the Vanishing Act, a performance so complete that nobody, including Sterling, understood they were standing next to a legend that had learned to pretend to be ordinary. She walks through the Denver rain without hurrying. The cardboard box balanced on her hip contains everything she's allowed to keep from this version of her life, a cracked mug that says "World's Okayest Nurse," a succulent that died 3 weeks ago and she's been watering anyway, and a photograph from Ramadi showing her unit in tactical gear, half of them already knowing they wouldn't make it home. The rain hammers the parking lot like applause for a performance nobody applauded while it was happening. The monitors screamed. O2 sat dropping through the 80s. 78. 72. The cardiothoracic surgeon was still 10 minutes out, maybe more, caught in Denver traffic on I-25, and James Rourke's heart was filling with fluid that had nowhere to go. The attending resident froze. The 2 interns froze. The charge nurse froze. In the ICU, freezing meant dying. Laura moved. She didn't ask permission. She didn't check the chain of command. She grabbed a sterile tray, an 18-gauge needle, a 10-milliliter syringe, and the kind of composure that only comes from having done this before under conditions these residents couldn't imagine. Her hands were steady as surgical steel. Her breathing was the only sound in the room besides the ventilator's wheeze and the heart monitor's descent into panic. "Nurse Bennett, stop!" Dr. Sterling's voice cut through the controlled chaos like a scalpel. He stood in the doorway, pale, his administrative authority suddenly material in a way it had never been before. "You are not authorized to perform that procedure. That is final." She took one measured breath. Met his eyes. Did not pause. The needle went in at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the anatomical landmark burned into her memory from 23 years of saving lives in places where waiting for the right doctor meant watching people die. She could see the fear in Sterling's face, the knowledge that she knew exactly what she was doing, that her hands held competence he could never diminish with a fabricated disciplinary notice or a phone call to her references. The hiss of air escaping. Fluid. Dark and urgent. 10 milliliters. 20. 30. Each withdrawal gave Rourke's heart room to beat again. The monitors climbed. 85. 89. 92. Sinus rhythm stabilized and holding. The breathing tube fogged with oxygen and life. Sterling's mouth opened and closed like a fish dying on dry land. "Call cardiothoracic," Laura said, handing the needle to the resident who'd finally unfrozen. "Tell them it's under control. He can wait in recovery." Her voice didn't rise. Didn't shake. Just stated fact with the weight of someone who'd made these calls when the alternative was body bags and classified reports. The resident nodded and moved. The interns dispersed. The ICU resumed its organized dance of beeping and breathing and hands moving with purpose instead of panic. Laura stepped back from the bed. From the corner of her eye, she saw Rourke's hand reach for her arm, his eyes open and tracking. He'd been conscious. Aware enough to know who pulled him back from the edge. He whispered the words so quietly only she heard them. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Bennett." She didn't acknowledge it. She couldn't. Not here. Not in front of Sterling, who was backing out of the ICU bay with the expression of someone watching his world collapse. She simply patted Rourke's shoulder once and turned away. But that wasn't the worst part. By 2:08 p.m., 13 minutes after Sterling left the ICU, he was in his office making phone calls. The first was to Thomas Wickham, Chief of Medicine, who owed Sterling for never reporting a wrong-site thoracotomy 3 years ago. The second was to Maria Chen, a board member with a son in private school and tuition debt, who'd benefited from Sterling's willingness to overlook her late-night pharmaceutical inventory discrepancies. The third was to Richard Hayes, another board member who Sterling had helped secure a consulting contract with the hospital's parent company worth $847,000 in unmarked annual payments. Sterling told them all the same thing. Laura Bennett was unstable. Unpredictable. She'd operated beyond her scope. She was a liability. One of them had already seen her patient files. Sterling had prepared falsified documentation, audit trails he'd created himself, supposed medication errors that never happened. By 3:15 p.m., all three had signed the permanent termination paperwork. By 3:22 p.m., Sterling had also contacted the Denver FBI field office, hoping to preemptively discredit her by suggesting she had a dangerous classified background, something unstable, something that warranted their attention. He wanted them to know she was a problem before she could become a witness to anything. What Sterling didn't know was that Special Agents Morrison and Lynn had been investigating his phantom billing for 167 days. What he didn't know was that James Rourke's Presidential Security Detail insurance had triggered an audit 6 months ago. What he didn't know was that his attempt to manufacture evidence and silence a witness had just moved him from white-collar fraud to federal obstruction of justice. Security came for Laura at 5:43 p.m. 2 guards she didn't recognize, a manila envelope with her termination letter, and a "please collect your personal items and exit the building" that was delivered with the practiced neutrality of people who'd done this before. Her locker contained not much: scrubs, a photograph she kept face down, a half-empty can of coffee she'd been nursing since 7 in the morning. She placed them in a cardboard box one of the guards offered. Sterling appeared as she walked toward the exit. He positioned himself in the hallway, blocking her path, his voice rising just enough to be heard but not loud enough to draw security attention beyond what was already watching. "You were warned about practicing beyond your scope, Nurse Bennett. This hospital has standards." Each word was measured, surgical, designed to humiliate. "You put patients at risk. You violated multiple protocols. I gave you a chance to stay within your lane." She didn't stop. Didn't slow. Just walked past him like he was furniture. Like he was a monitor beeping in the background, part of the ambient noise of a place she was leaving forever. The cardboard box was light enough to carry one-handed. her other hand pressed against the locker next to hers as she passed, a moment of contact with something solid before she stepped into the Colorado evening where the rain had come hard while she was inside, where the parking lot steamed with heat rising from asphalt still warm from the afternoon. A bus passed. It didn't stop. She wasn't at the right corner, or maybe her thumb was too small a gesture, or maybe buses just didn't stop in places where people stood alone with cardboard boxes containing their entire professional lives. The rain soaked through. The cardboard weakened. Inside, a cracked mug that said "World's Okayest Nurse" sat on top of a dying succulent she'd been watering anyway for 3 weeks after everyone stopped trying to keep it alive. Below that, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag to protect what little could be protected, was a photograph. 23 service members in tactical gear, faces masked, bodies arranged for the camera during Operation Iraqi Freedom, Ramadi, 2003. 12 of them were still breathing. 11 weren't. Laura was in the center, younger, her presence like a tank idling in a garage, power in stillness. Her phone buzzed. "Michael. Mom, where are you? Are you okay?" She didn't text back. She stood under the rain at a bus stop on the corner of 6th and Downing, water dripping from her hair and soaking through her scrub jacket, and thought about 23 years of service erased by a government order. About being told she could never surface. About the boy she'd pulled from a collapsed building in Ramadi when he was 6 years old, his small body limp and grey with dust, his lungs filled with the residue of a structure that should have killed him. She'd carried him 2 kilometers to the aid station, her tactical vest already soaked in someone else's blood, her mind calculating oxygen deprivation and internal bleeding and the exact number of minutes before his eyes would stop tracking light. She'd saved him then. She'd saved him again today. And she had nothing left to show for it except a box that was falling apart and a uniform that no longer existed. But that wasn't the moment everything changed. That wasn't where the story turned from tragedy into reckoning. The next morning, a 17-year-old boy with his mother's straight shoulders and his father's determined jaw pushed past the reception desk at Oak Creek Memorial carrying a shadow box of medals and a worn jacket with a faded SEAL Team unit patch sewn inside the lining. Security tried to stop him, but his voice was already loud, already cracking with the weight of something he'd been carrying for years without knowing it. "Where's Dr. Sterling? I need to find Dr. Sterling. My mom, she doesn't have to hide anymore." The hallway went still. The boy opened the shadow box. Inside, medals caught the fluorescent light. Bronze. Silver. A ribbon the color of wine and blood. Papers. A military file with a name redacted and then unredacted. A birth certificate. A discharge summary marked medical necessity that nobody was supposed to have access to. Michael Bennett had taken everything from his mother's closet, everything she'd buried, and was about to blow the lid off a secret so classified that the government had spent 2 decades pretending it didn't exist. The rain hammered the parking lot like applause that wouldn't stop. Laura stood at the bus stop on Spee Boulevard with a cardboard box balanced against her hip, the kind of box that held the entire architecture of a life someone had ordered you to erase. Inside was a cracked mug that read "World's Okayest Nurse," a gift from Michael when he was 8 years old, back when he thought she worked normal shifts and saved normal people. Beneath it, a dying succulent she'd kept on her apartment windowsill for 3 years, leaves curling inward like hands folding into fists. And at the bottom, buried under 2 decades of intentional forgetting, a photograph. Her SEAL team from 2003. Charlie Platoon, FOB Ramadi, before the wire. 23 faces in desert camouflage. 11 of them had come home. The water pooled at her feet. She didn't move. Her dress was still damp from security escorting her past the break room where no one had looked at her, past the board where Sterling's fabricated reprimand still hung like a wanted poster, past the trauma bay where she'd saved a life that mattered more than her career ever would. She stood there until the rain soaked through her scrub jacket and the box started to dissolve at the corners. A text arrived on her phone at 6:16 p.m. "Michael." One word, "Mom." The next morning came like an invasion. At 8:14 a.m., a 17-year-old kid with her jawline and his father's shoulders pushed past the reception desk of Oak Creek Memorial with the velocity of someone who'd been trained his entire life to never ask permission. He carried a shadow box the size of a briefcase. He carried a jacket, an old thing, faded Ranger green, with a unit patch sewn into the lining, the same patch that had been buried under his mother's apartment floorboards. The nurse at the desk stood up. Michael didn't break stride. "Where's the administrator?" His voice had the texture of someone who'd grown up listening to his mother not speak, and learned to speak in her place. "I need the board members. And every doctor who fired my mom." What happened next moved through Oak Creek Memorial like a tactical breach. Within 4 minutes, the administrator was in the hallway. Within 7, Dr. Sterling appeared, still holding his coffee, still believing his narrative had teeth. Michael opened the shadow box. Bronze star. Silver star. Purple heart. Another purple heart. And beneath them, a navy cross, the blue ribbon holding weight that Sterling had never carried, would never understand, could never remove. "Mom, they need to see these." Michael's voice cracked exactly once. "You don't have to hide anymore." Laura stood in the background of her own revelation, rain still visible on her shoulders, and said nothing. She didn't have to. The silence was doing all the work. James Rourke heard the commotion from cardiac ICU. He heard the sound of boots on linoleum and voices changing register, and he struggled upright in his hospital bed with an fur still trailing from his arm like a tether. His surgeon had warned him not to move. Rourke had been shot at by people less dangerous than his own government, so he sat up anyway. And when he saw Michael Bennett holding that shadow box, recognition moved across his face like a shutter opening. He looked at Laura. And he said her rank aloud for the first time in 20 years. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Bennett." 2 words. That's all it took to end the silence. A nurse appeared in the doorway with a manila folder, hands trembling as she opened it. She began to read, and her voice grew stronger with every line, as if the words themselves were giving her permission to speak truth in a place built on comfortable lies. Subject: Bennett, Laura Marie. Born 1980. Enlisted 2001. 23 years continuous service. 3 combat deployments. Multiple combat deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, Philippines. Classified operations, JSOC directed, redacted, redacted, redacted. The nurse looked up. "This file exists." Officially, she doesn't. Officially, none of this happened. Within the hour, a man in dress blues arrived at Oak Creek Memorial, and the hallway straightened like a spine. Commander David Hayes from Naval Special Warfare Command, the kind of presence that made the fluorescent light seem dimmer by contrast. He stood at attention, not requested, not performative, but the real thing, and he began to speak her decorations into existence as if he was calling roll with the names of her dead. 2 Bronze Stars with Valor for leadership under fire in Anbar Province, 2005 and 2008. He paused. The hallway held its breath. Purple Heart for wounds sustained during Operation Phantom Fury. 2nd Purple Heart for trauma sustained during Operation Imposing Law. Another pause. The air pressure changed. Navy Cross for exceptional valor in Ramadi, 2004, where Senior Chief Petty Officer Bennett held a defensive perimeter alone for 4 hours under sustained small arms and RPG fire, enabling the extraction of 12 civilians, including 1 6-year-old Iraqi child. He met Laura's eyes. "That child is in this hospital." She saved him twice. Dr. Sterling's face didn't just drain of color. It drained of structure, as if something holding him together had been removed. His hand opened and his coffee cup fell. It shattered on the tile floor. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel. That's when the FBI agent stepped forward, the ones he dismissed as routine auditors 3 months ago, the ones who'd been downloading server logs and photographing his office schedule and tracking his phone while he thought he was untouchable. Dr. Marcus Sterling. Agent Lynn's voice was polite like a scalpel is polite. "We need to discuss the 17 counts of healthcare fraud you've been charged with." The phantom cardiac procedures billed through federal insurance. The $340,000 in false claims for a patient who never had the procedures performed. The 3 counts of falsifying medical records to cover your tracks. The obstruction of a federal investigation. And the witness tampering when you terminated Nurse Bennett to silence a competent medical professional who might have noticed the discrepancies in your billing. Sterling tried to speak. His mouth moved like a fish pulled from water. You accessed her personnel file at 11:48 p.m. on the night you fired her, Agent Morrison continued, holding up a tablet. Your security card shows it. Your emails to board members reference eliminating the problem. Her fingerprints in the system triggered an alert that she had security clearance. You perceived her as a threat. You acted on that perception by creating false documentation and destroying her career. I was protecting patient safety, Sterling said. His voice had the texture of something already dead. You were protecting your billing scheme, Hayes cut in. His voice was like a tank idling in a closed garage, controlled, dangerous, absolutely certain. You fired a decorated combat veteran to hide your fraud. You humiliated a woman who served this country with more honor than you'll ever understand. You chose her. The board members Sterling had counted on began to disappear from eye contact. Dr. Vance, who had the wrong site surgery covered up. Dr. Mehta, whose stroke misdiagnosis Sterling had buried in a medical review. Administrator Krantz, whose opioid diversion Sterling had never reported. They weren't coming. They were witnesses now. They were also under investigation. Their silence was a form of testimony. Security approached Sterling with quiet precision. The handcuffs made a metallic sound, not dramatic, just precise, like a lock clicking. They walked him out past the break room where colleagues had evacuated whenever Laura sat down. Past the bulletin board where his fabricated reprimand still hung. Past Dr. Chen, who had questioned whether Laura had even finished nursing school. Past every person who had chosen to believe a man in a white coat over the evidence of a woman's competence. No one moved. No one spoke. The sound was the sound of boots on tile and the pneumatic hiss of the automatic doors closing behind him. Laura stood in her rain-soaked scrubs and watched her entire destruction get loaded into an FBI vehicle. Her face showed nothing. Nothing at all. That was the real power, not the medals, not the rank, not the decorations. It was the ability to hold absolute stillness while the architecture of a man's entire career collapsed around him like a building with its supports removed. Michael reached for her hand. She took it. 2 years later, a photograph arrived on Michael's phone. It showed Dr. Sterling in a strip mall parking lot in Commerce City, standing behind a folding table next to a tax preparation booth. He was selling supplemental insurance policies from a folding table. His medical license was revoked. His freedom was intact only because there were things worse than prison, and one of them was irrelevance. But that wasn't where the story ended. That was just where the truth began. Laura Bennett stood in her dress blues at a VA hospital ribbon-cutting ceremony on a Tuesday morning in May. The sun was different here, clearer somehow, as if it was permitted to touch certain people. Her Navy cross hung openly from her neck. Her name was engraved on the building behind her, the Laura Bennett Trauma Center. A new structure. Built to last. Commander Hayes stood at her right shoulder. James Rourke stood at her left, wearing the uniform of a combat medic instructor, the same rank and responsibility he'd watched her exercise under fire, now carrying forward the knowledge she'd taught him by example in operating theaters built out of necessity. Michael stood in the crowd, a Naval Academy acceptance letter folded in his jacket pocket. The hospital staff who had exiled her attended the ceremony. Some came because they were ashamed and had learned something. Others came because they'd watched a decorated senior officer take a folding table in a strip mall as her vindication and decided that decency might be worth the risk. Dr. Chen approached Laura after the ceremony. She carried flowers. She carried regret. She carried the memory of asking a woman who'd closed chest wounds in the dark if she'd even finished nursing school. "I'm sorry," Chen said. Laura shook her hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Forgiveness was just another kind of authority, and authority didn't require justification. Rourke handed her something. A frame. Inside was a photograph of the faded unit patch, the one sewn into a jacket lining, the one that had remained classified for 2 decades. Beside it was a photo from 2003, Laura in combat gear, Rourke as a dust-covered child with one hand in hers. And beside that, a current photograph, both of them in uniform, standing in this hospital, alive. "You saved me twice, Senior Chief," Rourke said. His voice didn't crack. "Once in Ramadi. Once here." Laura looked at the frame. She looked at the man who had been a child, who had become a warrior, who had come home. She held the frame like it was a classified document that was finally permitted to exist. That evening, she gave the closing speech at the ribbon cutting. The sun was setting behind the Denver skyline. She stood at a podium in front of veterans and active service members and medical staff and watched the faces of the people who had doubted her, mocked her, abandoned her. "You don't earn respect in the light," she said. Her voice was quiet. It made everyone lean forward. "You earn it in the dark. When no one's watching. When there's no reward except knowing you did what was right." She paused. She looked at each face. She saw the understanding begin to move across them like a wave. True class is what you do when the lights go out. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the applause began, not like rain, but like judgment, like recognition, like the sound of a world finally understanding what it had almost destroyed. The camera lingered on her shadow box, now displayed in the hospital lobby, medals catching the light. Then it cut to an empty folding table in a strip mall, no customers coming, no one asking questions, just a man selling insurance to people who would never know what he'd cost. If this story of hidden honor resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video, because the people who change the world are rarely the ones we see coming. What would you do if you discovered the quiet person next to you held secrets that could change everything? Comment below, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story of justice served in the darkness.